Ok, bonjour. Aujourd'hui, nous avons le plaisir d'accueillir un mathématicien, Yann Brégnier, directeur de recherche au CNRS à l'École normale supérieure au département de mathématiques et applications. Donc, la raison pour laquelle Yann est ici, c'est que nous l'avons rencontré à Nice. Il a été l'un des précurseurs de la macroconstruction qui a été appliquée au catalogue des galaxies, notamment dans le cadre ici à l'IAP de la thèse qu'a fait il y a quelques années Guillaume Lavaux. Et en fait, la macroconstruction a été inventée, a été appliquée pour la première fois en cosmologie par une équipe à Nice, dirigée par Uriel Frisch, et Yann Brégnier a collaboré avec eux, et en fait, il a dérivé un théorème prouvant l'existence d'une solution au problème de Mach. Aujourd'hui, il va nous parler d'autre chose. Donc, il va nous parler de modeling of self-gravitating fluids, combinatorial and stochastic approaches. Sorry for the introduction in French.
Ah yes, thank you. Merci beaucoup, mais je pense que je vais parler en anglais, hein, c'est ça?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction. And well, it's a little bit embarrassing to make a speech in this framework because of course I am a mathematician, so of course I am fascinated by physics, but of course I am very incompetent in physics. And then part of this talk will be about some speculation coming from a mathematician without serious analysis by physicists. So just consider what I'm going to talk about as a kind of fantasy designed by a mathematician, and of course, as usual, this may have some counterpart into the framework of mathematics. So even if you play with physics, then there will be some interesting output in mathematics. And we have seen that many times in the past. So this is a kind of talk of this sort I'm going to talk about. And so let me try to give you an idea about the topics I'm going to discuss about. So the starting point is really the fluid mechanics, because this is what I learned more or less when I was a student, and in particular the model designed by Euler in the 18th century for incompressible fluids, so like water typically. And there has been a lot of interest for this equation on the mathematical side because of a famous paper by Vladimir Arnold in the 60s giving a nice geometrical interpretation of this model. And I will talk about that a little bit. And then I will try to convince you that if you are thinking in a computational way, it is very natural from this viewpoint of Arnold to deduce a kind of combinatorial approximation of incompressible fluid mechanics. So this will be the first step. In particular, we will get a kind of dynamical system, a dynamical system for interacting particles. But the interaction between particles is very different from the usual one where you use some green function like, like a Poisson green function, these kind of things. And this is more like a combinatorial interaction between particles. And it turns out that if you, and this is at the level of a finite number of particles, and if you go to some limit, continuous limit, you recover something which is very close to the Vlasov-Poisson equation for Newtonian gravitation. However, it's not exactly the Vlasov-Poisson equation because there is a kind of nonlinear correction to the Poisson equation, so it's not exactly the Poisson equation you solve. It's like the so-called Monge-Ampère equation. And after that, it turns out that you have you can do a derivation. So let me go to the so I think I just described that. So what I call Monge-Ampère gravitation, and this model can get rather direct derivation from a purely stochastic model, which is the model of a Brownian cloud. A Brownian cloud, so it's just a pack of particles that are evolving by Brownian motion, nothing else. So there is absolutely no structure, but however, by using some kind of a large deviation principle, some least action principle, and quite a lot of small parameters, I must confess, then you recover this Vlasov-Monge-Ampère system, and therefore, in some sense, you recover some Newtonian gravitation. So I think, at least for me, it was a lot of fun to do that, so I don't know, probably it has not a great value at the physical level, but this is certainly stimulating at the level of mathematics. Okay, so let me restart the talk. So this is a presentation of the paper of not Vladimir, but Leonhard Euler in 1757, where he introduced the equation of fluid motion. So the so-called Euler equation. And it is remarkable that this is something that I was not really aware of until recently, that is essentially the first PDEs ever written, the first partial differential equation ever written. So this is 1757. So there were some attempts before, and in particular there is this famous paper by D'Alembert where to define the motion of vibrating strings, which is from 1746, something like that, so maybe less than 10 years before. But if you look at the paper, it's horrible. It's really horrible, and you don't even see PDE. I mean, it's written in such a crazy way. And you see that the writing of Euler is almost the same as the one we still use. So it's remarkable that Euler started the PDE with this equation, because this equation is not a very simple equation. It's not like the heat equation or the wave equation. It's a much more subtle equation, and from the mathematical viewpoint, is one of the most challenging PDEs. So it's very simple. So actually, this full set of equations, this is the acceleration equation, but I have to complete that with the continuity equation. And the complete system involves both the continuity equation and the... So it's very simple. So from the physical viewpoint, it's completely simple. From the mathematical viewpoint, it's very simple to write. However, mathematically, it's still a very strange object, which is largely... which is not really understood, and it should be put at the same level at least as Navier-Stokes equation. So for mathematicians, this equation is still really strange equation, and there are a lot of attempts, a lot of production of results attracting the most famous mathematicians. For instance, in the recent years, you can see frequently some paper by Terry Tao, which is one of the most famous field medalists in mathematics. And he's not a specialist, but he's so fascinated by the subject that regularly he writes paper on this issue. So this is really a fantastic object. And okay, I didn't want to talk too much about Euler, but you may know that Euler is a gigantic mathematician because, you know, he made, I mean, introduced this Riemann zeta function, which is related to the most famous conjecture in mathematics, the Riemann hypothesis. So he introduced topology, you know, with this the graph theory with the Königsberg bridge problem. Topology because he was introducing this famous Euler Poincaré index relating the number of edges or the longer number of faces for polygons, and so it's a gigantic mathematician, and it's very nice for PDE people that he really introduced as really almost the first PDE, such an interesting PDE. Okay. So, and also, this is my viewpoint, a personal viewpoint, that I think this is really the first field theory, because in some sense, he was able to describe a physical phenomenon with a set of consistent PDEs. And because even Newtonian gravitation is not so much like that, in my opinion. So, this is really the prototype of Maxwell, Einstein, Schrödinger, Dirac. to describe a physical phenomenon by a consistent set of PDEs. And I think this is not so much a knowledge because fluid mechanics is attached to mechanics, but I think it is really some kind of beginning of theoretical physics in some sense. Okay, and so my purpose is to, it's very well illustrated by these funny pictures that I knew from a Czech colleague who was wearing that on a t-shirt. And this belongs to the Big Bang Theory, you know, the TV program. So it's very well sweet. It's perfect for for this institute to make a reference to the Big Bang Theory, right? And then it's fantastic because you have the transition between combinatorics, like the Rubik's Cube, and fluid mechanics. And when I saw this T-shirt, I said, "Wow, it's fantastic!" So tell me. And I discovered this was. You can see that on this TV program. Okay, so let me start by reminding you of the link between fluid mechanics and geometry. So this was, probably it was understood before, but at least it was clearly established by Vladimir Arnold in '66, that if you consider the motion of an ideal incompressible fluid driven by the Euler equation, so this is like the motion, can be rephrased in terms of a geodesic curve, but it's a geodesic on an infinite dimensional configuration space, which is the group of volume preserving diffeomorphism. So it's a rather abstract view, but you can, it's quite simple actually. So you have this, you have a, for instance, you have a Riemannian manifold like a sphere. You look at all possible diffeomorphism of the sphere that are preserving the area, and you define a metric. So the metric is very simple. This is the L2 metric defined on the tangent space. And then you, out of that, you have the concept of, at least formally, a concept of geodesic curve. And it turns out that the equation of geodesics is just the Euler equation for incompressible fluids. Very clear, very neat. Of course, there are a lot of problems to do that rigorously, but the idea is quite simple. Okay, and yeah, this is what I just said. And then just to show you some idea about this configuration space, here I took as a manifold just the periodic square, and so I put a grid on it. And I show you 3 different diffeomorphisms, and only out of the 3, only one is volume preserving, area preserving, because we are in 2D. And clearly this is the one on the low right corner, because you see that every cell is distorted, but the area is preserved. And of course, for the other one, you have a lot of distortion of the area. And therefore, to be area of volume preserving is a very severe constraint, and therefore if you are following a geodesic on this group of volume preserving diffeomorphism, you have to pay the price for that. And the price to pay is the pressure field, because even if a fluid, incompressible fluid, has no external forces, nothing is acting on the fluid, just to preserve the volume, you need some internal effort, and this is the pressure. So the pressure field, or in more geometrical term, you can say that the pressure is more or less like the curvature of the geodesics. Okay. So the pressure field is a very simple way to encode this volume preserving constraint in a geometric way. Okay, so now, since I have also a background in computation, it is interesting to see what could be done at the discrete level. And something which is pretty clear, that to be a volume preserving map at the discrete level correspond to be a permutation. So, and to show that, let me remind you of this old-fashioned game, the jeu de taquin, and where you have, so you can think about this like as the physical domain as a square, and then you divide the square in subsquare of equal volume, equal area, and then in the jeu de taquin, you have to do some permutation of this cube. And therefore, this is like the discrete image of the configuration space of an incompressible fluid, so a sequence of permutation. So this is the basic idea. So this is an idea that I tried to develop some years, a long time ago, actually. And of course, you have to face a problem. So how do you define geodesics on a set which is completely discrete? Because if you discretize the physical domain, so you have the permutation group, which is a discrete object, and therefore you are out of differential geometry, and therefore the concept of geodesic looks really weird. However, so there are essentially two ways to address that. One way is to do geodesic with discrete time, which you can do actually. And another way, which is also very interesting, is to say that instead of looking for geodesics, we are going to look for approximate geodesics. And here there will be a little bit of mathematics in this slide, so I hope I will not be confusing you. So, so let me concentrate on a very simple object like the unit cube, for where the motion of the fluid is taking place. And we do this kind of decomposition of the cube in subcube. So it's dyadic, but that doesn't matter at all. So you just divide the cube in subcube of same volume. And the notation for the barycenter of every cube will be, okay, so the notation is a little bit weird. So A of alpha, so alpha will be the label of the cube. And A of alpha is just the center of every small cube. So try to remember that A of alpha is the center of the cube labeled by alpha. So, okay. And out of that, now my approximate fluid will be defined by the set of particles moving in the ambient space, that is RD. And instead of, so what I would like to do is to put every particle on one of these grid points, and then to do a permutation of them. But this will be a completely discrete motion, and I will lose, I mean, it will be difficult to see what is a geodesic curve. So once again, you can do it with discrete time, but another way to do it is to use a penalty approach. That is, we are going to use, for this set of particles, a penalty action that tell you that if you are far from one of the grid points, you have to pay a lot. And this is the formula I wrote. So the action I will take for this set of particles will be there will be the kinetic part, which will be dx dt square. So x of t is the position of the particle at time t, and dx dt is just the velocity. And once again, xt is valued in the ambient space, so it can be actually out of the cube. It's just, the cube is just embedded in the Euclidean space, and you have these particles who are floating around. And so you have the kinetic term, and there is a potential, minus a potential actually, because this is the action, this is not the energy. So the action is a way of measuring how far you are from a permutation. So this is the infimum with respect to all possible permutation of the position of the particle. So xt is the position of all the particles. So it's a big vector in Rd to the n. And you try to see how far it is from the grid points up to a permutation. So this is why there is an infimum with respect to sigma. So sigma is the notation for a permutation, and sigma n is the symmetric group, the group of the permutation of the n first integers. So, so A sub sigma is just a short notation for A of sigma of alpha. So in some sense, this is like, if you will, you have the grid points, so it's a cloud of points, and you consider that as a cloud of points in the sense that you don't care about the labels, and therefore you have to do the optimization with respect to the label in order to say how much your set of particles is far from the grid. Okay? And the epsilon is put in front of the kinetic energy. Of course, I could have put 1 over epsilon in front of the potential energy, just to tell you that we really want to emphasize that this particle should be close to the grid points, up to a permutation. And this is a way, this is a kind of consistent way, formally consistent way, to approximate the Arnold's idea of geodesic curves on the set of volume-preserving diffeomorphisms. Of course, up to discretization, because we substituted the permutation group for the group of diffeomorphism, and because of the discreteness of the discrete configuration space, we introduce this penalty parameter to do the job. And this penalty parameter will play a role in the future. So in some sense, it's a funny idea, because in some sense, because you want to do something discrete, then you have to correct that by some small parameter, and this parameter has its own interest. Sorry? Yeah, sure. I could have, actually it's just to avoid to write 1 over epsilon. So, of course, this is equivalent to the kinetic energy plus 1 over epsilon, yeah, sure. Okay, and so I hope the notation are okay now. So xt is the time-dependent position in the big space Rd to the capital N, and then A sigma is just the grid points up to a permutation. And actually, this kind of approximation for geodesics is well known in the smooth case. For instance, there is a very old paper for smooth manifold, Riemannian manifold. You can approximate geodesic by this kind of penalty potential. So in some sense, you have a potential that tells you that if you are far from the manifold, you have to pay a lot. So, okay. So now, of course, it's a very simple game to get out of the least action principle, the dynamical equation out of that. Just you play around. And actually, it's very trivial. So there are some technicalities, but let me skip that. So what you get is that every particle is accelerated, and don't forget that there is the epsilon in front of the acceleration, by xt minus a of sigma opt. What do I mean by that? So the acceleration is based of you look at the position of the particle, and you look at the grid point corresponding to the particle up to the permutation that makes the optimal assignment between the particles and the grid points. So the sigma opt is time dependent, and so for every set of position of the particle xt, you can compute the permutation that optimize the sum of the square distance between the grid points and the particle. So it is not entirely well defined, because of course, for instance, if by chance all the particles collapse at the same point, there will be many permutations doing the job. So this is something which is defined, this is well defined except on the small sets. And then there are some technicalities out of that. But let me skip this problem. And of course, you can also, it's a very concrete way to try to compute fluids numerically, okay? And but it's only recently, so it's in the last 5 years, that so I will go back to the the concept of Monge-Ampère later. But this kind of optimal assignment problem has been done efficiently only recently, and you can do some computation. Okay, so I did some theories some years ago about that also. And so this is typically a kind of computation which was done by Merigot and Galouette and Merigot. And this is like just the Kelvin-Helmholtz instability of a fluid when you have the initial velocity as it's a shear flow with a discontinuous velocity, and you see the development of the vortices created by the instability. And at least at the visual level, it is very convincing. And as I said to some people a little bit before, a very similar algorithm has been used by some people from Caltech to work with Pixar to design animation movies. Okay, so and then if you want to see, this is just the same picture, but you see more details. Okay, and you see that the discreteness of the permutation group is pretty nice if you want to get this kind of spray, you know, because if you, many conventional computational fluid dynamics method will enforce some continuity of the velocity field, and this will be very difficult to approximate sprays. But here, in some sense, because of the discreteness, you get sprays for free. Of course, they are not very physical, because sprays are very much related to surface tension effects. So this is physics for fun. It is not necessarily very serious physics, but at least visually, it looks very nice. So another slide, which is a little bit heavy in terms of mathematical notation, that now that we have done that, a weird idea, which is typically more like a mathematical idea than anything else, is, well, now I have, so I started, I started by discretizing the fluid motion by permutation. The price I had to pay for that was to introduce a penalty parameter epsilon, completely artificially. And now I can play the game in a reverse way. So I can go back to the continuous limit, say going to a finite set of particles to a continuum description, and to see what I get. And then you can do some mathematics about that. And so what you get is a kind of Vlasov-Poisson equation. So I don't just try to justify that, because this would be a little bit time consuming. So believe me that if you are able to pass to the continuous limit while keeping the penalty parameter untouched, you get this set of equations. So I hope the notation are not too barbaric for you. So F is a notation that we use in mathematics, at least, to define in some sense, the probability to find a particle at time t with position x and velocity or impulse psi. So sorry for using psi, but this is done quite often in my field of mathematics. So psi stands for the velocity or the impulse. Here there is no difference between impulse and velocity because we are not in a relativistic framework. And so the coupling equation, so F is driven by a potential phi, which depends on time and space. Well, in some sense, this is related to the pressure that we had in fluid mechanics, but since we introduced the penalty parameter epsilon, it's no longer a pressure. And this potential is coupled to the macroscopic densities of the particle. So the macroscopic densities of the particle is just what you get by integrating the phase space density F with respect to the impulse or the velocity variable. So this is counting the number of particles you have at a given time and a given place. And the equation is not the Poisson equation, it's a Monge-Ampère equation, so it's a little bit weird. So the Monge-Ampère equation, so you take the potential, you take the second order space derivative, so the Hessian matrix, dx, what is denoted by dx squared phi, so all the second derivative in space. You add the identity matrix and you take the determinant. So that's the Monge-Ampère equation, and therefore it's reasonable to call that Vlasov-Monge-Ampère because you have the coupling, like we say Vlasov-Poisson. And now I can tell you the relationship with this equation and Vlasov-Poisson is pretty simple, because if you assume that epsilon is a small parameter, which is consistent with the idea we started with, because epsilon was a penalty parameter, it's not supposed to be large, and you expand the determinant with respect to epsilon, when you expand the determinant at the zero order level, of course the leading term is the identity matrix, so you get 1. And then you, in some sense, you recover a kind of reformulation of the Euler equation by telling that the macroscopic density should be uniform. So in some sense, epsilon goes to 0 is the Euler equation written in a kinetic way, in a phase space way. So in some sense, it is consistent with the derivation we did. So if I say put just epsilon is 0, I just get that the macroscopic density of the particle is uniform. So which is more or less a rephrasing of Euler's model. However, if we keep the next order term, it's quite interesting because when you expand the determinant, the next order term will be the trace of the second derivative of phi, and the trace of the second derivative of phi is nothing but the Laplacian. So up to the second order, this Monge-Ampère equation boils down to the equation 1 plus epsilon Laplacian of phi. And therefore, if you balance that with the macroscopic density, you get that epsilon times the Laplacian of phi is equal to the macroscopic density minus 1. And 1 should be understood as the average density. So if you do, for instance, a Vlasov-Poisson simulation in the periodic box, you know that you have to remove the bulk density, otherwise you get garbage. So this is similar. So the 1 is just the way of balancing the. So it's a kind of. It's a little bit like in a neutral plasma, but here this is gravitational. Okay, so in some sense, it is not so ridiculous. This penalty parameter can be interpreted as the physical constant you have to put in front of the Laplacian to define the gravity potential in terms of the macroscopic densities of the particle. Okay. Okay, so this PDE is quite interesting. So there have been not so much work on it, but there are some work on it because the Vlasov-Monge-Ampère has some properties, interesting properties. In particular, for instance, a nice properties of Monge-Ampère equation that if by bad luck the macroscopic density is very concentrated, typically like a delta function. If you have the Poisson equation, you know that because the green function of the Poisson equation is not nice. So you get an enormous field, unbounded field, not even square integrable. But with Monge-Ampère, it's no problem. So in some sense, Monge-Ampère can accept right-hand side which are singular and provide a potential for which the gradient stays bounded. So the bound will depend on epsilon, of course. So you can see Vlasov-Monge-Ampère like a nonlinear cutoff theory for Vlasov-Poisson. That is, when you have a very strong gravitational potential due to the concentration of the particle, this gives you a kind of automatic way to bound the potential gradient created by this concentration. So it's kind of nonlinear cutoff version of Vlasov-Poisson, which I believe could be of interest at the numerical level, but I don't know if so far I don't know any. Well, I mean, this could be like a project to do to see what's going on. Okay, so now I can go to the. Okay, in this first part, I try to convince you, at least that from the mathematical viewpoint, there was some interesting to look at the fluid mechanics, and out of that, you get some kind of nonlinear correction of the Vlasov-Poisson equation. And now I would like to explain to you how you can derive this dynamical system, this combinatorial dynamical system, out of pure stochasticity. That is, I can define a completely stochastic model, and out of many awkward limiting process and large deviation arguments, I can get to this combinatorial dynamical system back. So this is the attempt of this second part of the talk. Okay. And actually, in the first attempt I made for that, I used a double large deviation principle, but for technical reasons, it was difficult to handle, and therefore I moved to another idea where I use the large deviation principle at least once, or only once, and I complete that with an idea that goes back to the idea of Louis de Broglie for quantum mechanics, which is called the Onde pilote, and which looks like a nice idea in this framework. Okay, and so in some sense, at least from the mathematical viewpoint, out of this analysis, in some sense, I have a purely stochastic model, and from it, presumably I get Vlasov-Monge-Ampère, which is an approximation of Vlasov-Poisson, and ultimately incompressible Euler. Okay, so let me try to explain that. So I hope it will be not too painful. It's not very difficult, but there are some notation. And, okay, so the concept of what I call a point cloud is when you have a set of particles, it's just the set itself. That is, you don't consider you can relabel the particle in any order you want. So it's a set, it's a collection of points. So mathematically, it's a point in Rd, which is the physical space to the capital N. So it's all possibilities. But you have to do a quotient by the symmetric group. That is up to a permutation of the label. So this is the rather common definition of a point cloud. Okay, and now the stochastic model I'm using is maybe the most simple you can think of. So you have the grid points, and you just let evolve this grid point by Brownian motion. Nothing else. So and I claim that I can get this limit out of that. Okay, so there is a level of noise, because the Brownian motion, I have to define the level of noise. So this will be denoted by nu, and this will disappear. So in the limit, nu will go to 0 at some point. So I will get rid of the noise at some point. Okay. But I need this parameter nu. Okay, so now it turns out that if you want to define the probability density of the cloud points when you evolve in time, actually, since I'm a PD guy, this is the same as solving the heat equation. In the huge space, Rd to the n, so the space of all position of the particle, so it's Rd to the n, so it's gigantic. So you just evolve the heat equation, so I hope the notation are more or less reasonable. And rho is the density of the particle in this huge space. And the peculiarity is we have to start with an initial condition which is symmetrized by the permutation group. So in some sense, you just consider the initial condition as a collection of delta, but I have to do, so in some sense, the x are located at these grid points A of alpha, but I have to do the symmetry with respect to the permutation, and therefore I get this formula. Okay. And of course, this is completely solvable because we are working in the whole space. So we have explicit formula. And the key point is you have to take the relabeling symmetry into account. Okay, now, of course, you get the explicit formula of the heat equation this way. So you have, of course, the delta becomes Gaussian, and that's essentially the only thing you have to do. And of course, there is a normalization constant to input. And this is the same as this is the same as the probability density to find the cloud points at time t at a given configuration x. So the heat equation is a good way of encoding that, because it's very trivial equation, right? Okay, so now I rewrite the heat equation, and here I copy this idea of that Louis de Broglie introduced long time ago, of the lone pilot. That is to say, attached to this equation, I can look at the companion ODE, which amount to follow some set of particles. So this set of particles a priori is unrelated to the grid points, and I follow the velocity field generated by the heat equation. So the velocity generated by the heat equation is minus nu over 2, the gradient of the logarithm of the density. So some people call that the osmotic velocity sometimes, at least in probability theory. So the heat equation generates a velocity field, which is singular at time 0, and then, but after time 0 it's completely smooth, and out of that you can follow trajectory. Of course, this trajectory will depend on the initial condition, and you cannot put the initial condition at 0 because 0 is singular. But if you know some positions, you put some particle at time t0 very small, and you just evolve the particle with this velocity field, you get something which has some connection with the heat equation, but it's a smooth dynamical system, except at time 0. That's a good, it's not like, so the heat equation corresponds to Brownian motion, which are very rough, because Brownian motion are not smooth. However, this on-pilot system generates smooth trajectories. And as I mentioned several times already, this is the idea that was proposed by De Broglie. And of course, for De Broglie, it was for the Schrödinger equation. Okay. So for instance, you can do exactly the same thing for the free Schrödinger equation, which would be totally consistent with De Broglie's approach. And in which case the velocity is defined as the gradient of the imaginary part of the logarithm of the wave function, which is complex value. Yes?
Question. Basically, it looks like dxt is an equation of Brownian motion, but
yeah.
it was specifying the probability properties.
Yeah, but in some sense, I think what is interesting is this idea of the way is now you don't consider Brownian motion anymore. So the Brownian motion corresponds to the heat equation, and the heat equation generates a velocity field which is perfectly smooth. So these trajectories are perfectly smooth.
So you mean that it's independent of the stochastic properties of the noise?
Well, but you consider that if you consider that the heat equation is already encoding that, it's an output of the stochasticity. So sometimes you can see that it's an apparent motion generated by the stochastic motion in some sense. But of course, certainly, by doing that, I lose a lot of information. But this is an output I can use. Okay? And then, of course, it's very simple to write because it's completely explicit. So you have a formula which is a little bit weird. So it is convenient to use an exponential change of time to simplify the expressions. And you have a kind of gradient flow that is, okay, maybe gradient flow is not a very well-defined concept. So it means that it's not a dynamical system in the sense that you don't define the acceleration of the particle. You just say that the particles are just moving, trying to move down the potential. Strictly speaking, it's not correct because the potential is time dependent. But however, this is a picture, you have a potential and just the particles are just falling down into the potential wells, which is very different from what we had before. Okay, and then there is a first step that maybe I will skip that, it's not so essential for my discussion, that at this level you can already pass to the limits with respect to the noise. So what is the zero noise limit of that? And then you get a gradient flow in a classical sense, in a more classical sense, and the potential of this gradient flow is exactly the one we already saw before. It's minus the infimum of the square distance between the collection of particles and the grid points up to a permutation. And it turns out that, and this I will not discuss, and this was, as was mentioned in the introduction, the connection with the Mach reconstruction, the Zeldovich approximation, but I think I will skip that. So I'm sorry, because I know that many people have been involved in that, but I will not discuss that. But at this level, you have already the connection with the Zeldovich approximation. So, for instance, you are one of the persons, right?
In some sense, you can actually use the Magnum transformation to get from the Schrödinger equation to the Schmidt equation. So it's used quite often.
Ah, okay, okay, okay.
And so in some sense, and so the equation as you showed is related to the heat equation. So in some sense,
Yeah.
it's sort of natural that these things come out.
Okay. And also, I mean, yeah, actually, that's very good. It's very good that you mentioned that, because you could also do the same thing starting not from the heat equation but from the Schrödinger equation, which is more appealing because it has more like a quantum framework. However, here at the mathematical level, it's much more difficult because you know the big difference between the Schrödinger equation, the wave function can cancel, can vanish, and therefore when you take psi square, you have no guarantee that, I mean, it can vanish. And this it makes the analysis very difficult. In the heat equation, you know that the density rho is strictly positive and smooth at every positive time. You know, so everything goes smoothly for the heat equation, and it would be much more difficult. So it's a vague project I had to, but I didn't find anybody to be convinced to do that, to see whether this kind of mathematical analysis could be done at the level of the Schrödinger equation. Okay, so, and also an interesting output that if you do that, actually maybe it's bad, actually, it's maybe a bad news, but this necessarily introduces some kind of sticky collisions. And some people might really hate that because, you know, there is no big reason to assume that even the Zeldovich approximation accept sticky collision. But this is, mathematically, you get sticky collision out of that. So this is, okay, it's not, I mean, so sticky collision is like this. You have particles, they go along straight line, and when they hit each other, they merge, and the momentum is preserved. But not, of course, the kinetic energy diminish, but the momentum is preserved. But surprisingly, some people actually didn't believe in this computation. So I just for fun, however, in spite of the fact that I have no reasonable theorem, I tried to do the computation in the case of the Schrödinger equation. And of course, since I wanted to compute that carefully with all possible permutation, and I did not want to do any approximation trick for that, then I had to limit myself to very few particles. So here you have computation with 5 particles. And very quickly, I mean, if you want to average over the permutation group without approximation, it's a nightmare very quickly. So with 5 particles, on this picture you see that the level, I mean, you rescale the Planck constant appropriately, and when you go from the right to the left, you go from quantum to classical in some sense. And you see that the stickiness appears also in this quantum framework. So they are not, of course, they are not sticking really, but they are exponentially, it's almost sticking. That is, the trajectory are so close that they look like sticking.
So in some sense, your Planck constant is viscosity.
Yeah, in some sense, yes. Yeah, that's right. So it seemed, but some people from quantum mechanics were surprised by that. So of course, it is bosonic statistics. That is, you don't put some, you don't, yeah. Actually, I tried to do some computation by using some fermionic initial condition. It was a disaster. So yeah, so I don't know how to do it properly. Okay, so now the final step is something which you might think a little bit artificial. So once you have this on-pilot dynamical system, it is quite natural to consider, well, maybe not natural actually, it's mathematically at least, it's natural to look at what you get when you do some kind of random perturbation of this dynamical system. So you add some noise. So eta is another level of noise, and you consider that this on-pilot trajectory are a little bit noisy. You add some noise, and therefore that's a good thing, because now we can use one of the big popular techniques in stochastic analysis, which is large deviation theory. So I just remind you, very roughly speaking, what it means, that if you have this first order dynamical system, if you know the position at time t0, well, of course, you know the position at time t1. There is no choice. However, if you put some noise, there is a very tiny probability to be very far from this T1. And the large deviation theory is analyzing this probability. And typically, the result is that the probability to go from position x theta 0 to position x theta 1 is very, very small. It's exponentially small. And it's roughly given by exponential of minus a over epsilon, where a is just the action defined by squaring the equation, actually, and integrating from theta 0 to theta 1. So when you have no potential, you would recover this classical result that geodesic curves can be related to Brownian motion when you in a similar way. So for a more complicated ODE system, this is the result. And of course, you see that if you stay on the dynamical system, of course, the A is 0. So this is so you get a large probability to be very close to the first order equation. However, with an exponentially small probability, you can be really off, completely off the trajectory of the system. And this is interesting because you get, after that, you get a kind of action principle, and out of A, you can define the optimal trajectory out of the action principle, and then you get a second order equation, a dynamical system. So that's the interest of using large deviation. So we start with a first order dynamical system, and thanks to the large deviation theory, we get a second order one. Okay, so now, because the on-pilot system is completely very simple, and it's a smooth field, actually, therefore, passing to the limit eta goes to 0 is completely standard application of the mathematical theory. So in math, Wenzel-Freidlin theory. And then we get an action, which you can compute explicitly, very simple one. And then you can try now to pass to the limit with respect to nu, which was the first level of noise I started with. You know, I had some noise to define my Brownian motion at the beginning. So now you can do that, and this is technically more difficult. This is so-called gamma convergence, and we got some help from one of the best specialists of calculus of variation, and therefore it turns out that the action you get is this one. So this is a square of the equation we found before some slides ago by letting nu goes to 0. And phi is still the same potential I discussed many times now. Okay, and now once you have that, so of course there are some technical difficulty because this potential phi is a little bit rough. It's not smooth. It is kinky. So it's an infimum of a finite number of parabola. So you have some kinks. So it's not perfectly smooth, so there are some difficulties. And however, at least at the formal level, when you look at the action principle, you recover this combinatorial system I discussed at the first part of the talk. Okay? Oh, there is equal is missing. So the sigma opt is the minimizer, the optimal permutation. Sorry, there is between sigma opt and arginf, there is a zero equality symbol missing. So in some sense, of course I did the calculation with epsilon is equal to 1, but this can be rescaled. So in some sense, but at least I had obtained a rather consistent theory to go from the stochastic model of a Brownian cloud down to the Euler equation, and with some intermediate step being the Vlasov-Mongeampère system, which is like correction, nonlinear correction to Vlasov-Poisson. Okay, so it is a little bit complicated because I had to consume many small parameters, because I had to use one level of noise to start with to describe the stochastic model. Then I used a second level of noise to do the stochastic perturbation of the on-pilot. Then I get the discrete model. So if I want the Vlasov-Monge-Ampere, I have to go to a continuum limit of particles. So this is the third step. And then after that, if I want to get Vlasov-Poisson, I need to justify that it's a correct approximation of Vlasov-Poisson in the limits where epsilon is small. So this is a lot of different steps. So it's not perfectly clean. And so my conclusion, because the time is over, that so this is, I think that's more or less what I just said. And okay, so here this is a very dangerous statement, but it seems to me that as far as understood, there is a lot of speculation and some theories explaining that the gravitation could be obtained through stochastic or quantum ideas. I think probably you know that much better than me. And at least at this very tiny level, which is very limited because I'm just talking about Newtonian gravitation and nothing else, then it seems that mathematically we can do something. There are some gaps in what I said. It's not a complete theorem because there are few gaps in the derivation, but at least we can understand that if you play this model of gravitation, at least can be derived mathematically from a purely stochastic model. So I am waiting for your criticism on this issue. And also I would like to say at the more computational level that although some years ago I would have been desperate about the possibility of doing large-scale calculation, but now with the Monge-Ampere solver that in particular Bruno Levy and Quentin Mérigot have developed. And so of course this is used currently for the Mach problem, right? So I did not discuss about the Mach reconstruction, but at least the Vlasov-Monge-Ampere it's solvable actually. Even we could do it if we want, because the Monge-Ampere solvers are quite efficient now. They can solve millions of particles are okay. Okay, thank you. So I think this is thanks.
Il y a des questions? Questions?
Or tomatoes? Rotten tomatoes.
So when you take these limits of the noise that goes to zero, is it
Which one? The one when you?
when you take the limits of the noise that goes to zero to recover continuous limits?
Yeah. So the which one? The first level?
No, the last part of
The last one. Yeah.
So this is equivalent to taking ensemble average over Brownian trajectories.
Okay, so actually in the first version of the paper, I did the largivation in the opposite way. So I started by so I exchanged the limit eta and nu, but this was a formal application of the largivation principle. And largivation, I mean, if the dynamical system is bad, if your velocity field is bad, it's dangerous. So this is why I really like this idea of working with the own pilot, because I got rid of the stochasticity at least at one level. And then I can use the Wenzel-Freidlin theory with a very smooth field, without any adaptation of the theorem. And in the first version, I was working at, there are two levels of stochasticity. And so I don't know, it's probably not a good answer to give you, but at least mathematically, technically, it was much easier to do that.
So I have two questions. First part is actually, I've always wondered, when you talk about we talk about Vlasov-Poisson equation, we never think of it as sort of linear,
Yeah.
But in some sense, when you talk about...
Well, it's nonlinear, but maybe I should have corrected that. When I say nonlinear correction, of course Vlasov-Poisson is nonlinear.
Yeah.
But it's a coupling of two linear equations. So it's nonlinear because of the coupling. When I say nonlinear correction, I mean that the coupling equation, the Laplace equation, which is linear, is substituted for by a nonlinear. So this is what I mean by, because of course Vlasov-Poisson is clearly nonlinear.
Sure, and then Monge-Ampere equation is sort of a nonlinear version of the Poisson equation.
Yeah.
But then you see intuitively, what is it that you probe with Monge-Ampère equation that you don't with the Poisson equation? You know, if you think of the density of particles, you know, in your discretized particle, what is it that Monge-Ampère actually proves that Poisson doesn't, fails to do so?
Yeah, in 2D is a kind of intermediate case. Well, I can tell you something about 1D. Because in 1D, the nice thing is Monge-Ampère is the same as Poisson, right? And I was very, okay, so sorry, I don't reply really to your question. But this is a comment I'm happy to make. I try to understand the argument of Zeldovich for Zeldovich approximation. And to me, he was really emphasizing something like that in some sense you can think in a one-dimensional way to understand the approximation. And I like that very much because, first of all, Monge-Ampère is the same as Poisson in 1D. So in some sense, you don't make any error in the 1D case. And also, and that's more philosophical, so you might not like it. So the Vlasov-Monge-Ampère, the Monge-Ampère equation has a very different property than the Poisson equation. Because the Poisson equation has clearly a symmetry with respect to the rotation group. So you change your coordinates, you don't change the equation. But Monge-Ampère has a different symmetry. It's affine symmetry. That is, you can distort the different dimension, the dimension of space differently. So in some sense, for Monge-Ampère, there is no difference between an ellipse and a sphere. Okay, and then this seems to be appealing with this idea that in some phenomena, if you have this kind of distortion, that some direction are favored, so it could be that the Monge-Ampère equation is a natural way to describe the phenomenon. And at least this is just philosophical, and also I know that in fluid mechanics, there is such a model, which is called a semi-geostrophic equation, where people have explained that by using the Monge-Ampère equation instead of the Poisson equation, they can do a better modeling of the atmospheric fronts. And atmospheric fronts is typically a situation where you have a kind of singularity where there is one coordinate, axis of coordinates, which is on which the phenomenon occurs. And this was, to me, very reminiscent of this argument that I didn't fully understand from Zeldovich. So it could be that, okay, this is very pretentious, but I have this claim that Monge-Ampère is maybe a good approximation to the Einstein equation, actually. Because, you know, the way of getting Vlasov-Poisson, you just approximate the Ricci curvature, blah, 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 and you get the leading term is the Poisson equation. But, okay, it's really shameful to say that because I have said that a long time ago already, that maybe by doing the approximation in a different way, it could be that the Monge-Ampère equation shows up in a natural way. And the Monge-Ampère equation is a geometric equation, actually, by the way, because this is the equation that describes the way of recovering a surface out of its Gaussian curvature. So this is a Gaussian curvature. So I have this vague hope that Monge-Ampère is not a bad approximation of the Einstein equation. But this is very pretentious. I have no clue to say anything of this sort. And nobody believed me, actually. I never found anyone who wanted to say, oh yeah, you are right. It must be a better approximation. And so I'm completely alone on this side. So this was the first question, or already this one? No. Yeah.
The second one is actually sort of conceptual. You start from the Brownian sort of cloud, and then at the end of the day, you arrive at completely deterministic equations, and gravity because it's deterministic. So where has the stochasticity gone?
What? Sorry?
Stochasticity that you initially started with.
That's quite mysterious because we have, this is this relabeling process actually, which is really fundamental. So the fact that we have to have this symmetry with respect to the relabeling, it creates the interaction in some sense, which is funny because it means that if you have a pack of particles out of the Brownian motion, you don't get much if you know who is who. But if you don't know who is who, you get something interesting. And also, you may know that there is this is related to optimal transportation theory, and this has been studied a lot in the recent years. has a noise-free limit of the so-called Schrödinger problem. The Schrödinger problem has nothing, is related to the Schrödinger equation, but in a strange way. So the Schrödinger problem is a kind of stochastic problem involving some noise, and the zero noise limit is just optimal transportation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I can give you some reference if you are interested by that. Actually, maybe I made some slides with, no, I didn't put the references, sorry.
D'autres questions, non?
At the beginning, when you consider the fluid, you consider it in the real space.
Yes.
Yeah. If you extend it to complex space, then there is some work, it is very well known, that you have an SUN symmetry for n which goes to infinity, and you, it leads to diffeomorphisms of SU2.
Okay.
Sorry, S2, the sphere. And I don't know then what would be, I mean, the whole model was worked in the 80s by somebody called Hope, Jens Hope. No, I don't know if you extend your formulation, especially in the differential equations.
Very interesting to know
how would...
no, I don't know. I will be very glad to get... I know something maybe related. There was an attempt by Vladimir Zetlin, which is actually now is more like in the geofluid sciences. And he introduced a discretization of the Euler equation. So maybe it's related to what you said. So which is based on the Fourier transform of, it's like a spectral approximation. However, it is done in such a way, it's related to SUN. And therefore, n goes to infinity leads to the Euler equation. So it might be related to what you said, but maybe it's different. But there is a theory like that. So in some sense, SUN in the complex SUN
yes.
is used to approximate the incompressible Euler equation. So it's maybe related to what you said. But I would be glad to get this reference.
Yeah, sure.
Une question? Bon, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.